It is totally possible that the next-gen Assassin's Creed, Far Cry and Watch Dogs games have multiple settings or different type of areas in one game, while of course right now they're all set in one time period or sometimes even in one location. So interesting stuff, and there's way more to discuss based on a new article Ubisoft published, so I want to get into that. If you enjoy that, then a like would be super appreciated, and let's go. Over on the official Ubisoft website, a new interview was published with the Executive Vice President of Creative for Ubisoft's Canadian studios, Lionel Reynaud, and I hope I pronounced that right. If you're not familiar, the Canadian studios from Ubisoft are mostly responsible for the Assassin's Creed series, Far Cry, Watch Dogs and also Rainbow Six Siege. And some interesting news came out of this article regarding those games, first talking about the Ubisoft open world titles and how they all started for Ubisoft with the release of Assassin's Creed back in 2007, but also what the future holds. Let's start with the most interesting quote from the article regarding the future of Assassin's Creed, where because of new technologies that are arriving, and I think he means the new generation of consoles, right? Rumors suggest that the PlayStation 5 and new Xbox will be here at the end of 2020, and that new technology will break the current limits of memory, according to Reynaud, where it would be possible to have the same world or game have several historical periods, that you can use the animus to travel from one period to the other. So no more only Ancient Egypt as the world that you can play around with, but also other worlds you can travel to inside this same game. Also mentioned were different areas of the world linked by travel systems, so that a Far Cry game or a Watch Dogs game could happen in different countries in the same experience seamlessly. And when I think about this, I always think about Pokemon Gold and Silver, where at the end you could go to Kanto, of course, from the previous games, Pokemon Red and Blue. So they also had like 2 games in one, or 2 worlds in one game. But of course, for a Ubisoft game, it would be of a way bigger scale, and it sounds really exciting, right? Not being stuck in one setting all the time, but actually having multiple open worlds that will feel different in one game. And it's also pretty ambitious, because I can imagine that recreating one city or landscape can be tough, so having 2 or 3 of them in one game will be even more challenging. We see a lot of assets being reused in open world games. We see the same looking enemies, and it makes sense in one world, where in the real world you would also have buildings that look the same. Well, this will of course not work, because the enemies you see in Victorian London, for example, are not the same as in Ancient Egypt, or the buildings of course as well. Not of course that there will ever be a Syndicate Origins crossover type of game, but you get the point, like those worlds are completely different. What is even more interesting is the fact that Reynaud talks about this when talking about the post-launch content support for their games. There was this question in the article: when does Ubisoft decide how long to keep creating new content for a live game after launch, as opposed to moving to a sequel? Where does the line get drawn? And of course, a good, very recent example of this is Assassin's Creed Origins. It got a ton of support from launch till the end of March, and then it went kind of quiet because we found out that a new game is already coming this year. The lines get fuzzier every year, says Reynaud, and that they now have longer lives for each game, even the ones that used to be solo-oriented games. Not sure why he says used to be solo-oriented games, because the Assassin's Creed games are still, of course, very solo-oriented. Anyway, he continues saying that they see a future where a game will stay and new experiences will come in the game. And then he goes on about the different experiences, bringing like new worlds to one game. So it could totally be that he means that a new Assassin's Creed game will start with one world, and then later down the line we will see a completely new setting being added to the game, instead of them releasing a new game like they are doing right now. A lot of stuff gets thrown around Odyssey, that is a big DLC pack for Origins, and yes, it does look similar to Origins because they built on that. But really, when you play it and you see all the new systems, you will totally see that it's a completely different game from Origins. And the sort of Assassin's Creed trilogy, we've seen that before with AZ2 to Brotherhood and then Revelations, and seems like Origins and then Odyssey and then an Agent Rome game are following the same trend. But what if the first next-gen Assassin's Creed game that launches on the PlayStation 5 and new Xbox let's say in 2021. What if that game is just one setting, one world, but then the year after that you get a new setting, and then the year after that you get a completely different setting as well, instead of Ubisoft releasing a completely new game. I think the reality now is that they can make way more money by releasing a new AC game than a huge DLC for the previous release. Maybe if they move it more into an MMO style of game like Destiny or The Division, I think then it makes way more sense to have a huge expansion with maybe a new setting a year after release. Because that would be a game that you then play for years, while Assassin's Creed right now is a game that you finish and then kind of leave and then maybe come back for the expansions, and that is it. So like, curious to see how this will develop. I think though that the return of multiplayer co-op is really like a question of when for Assassin's Creed and not if. I totally think it will return at some point. And yes, going back to the like games launching with multiple worlds from the start is something I can totally see happen in the future. I can for example see GTA 6 do that. You have like multiple cities in the game that you can all fly to, and all these cities are these big open worlds for you to explore as well. Sounds really cool. I think a rumor like at one point suggested that. I'm of course curious to hear what you think about the multiple open worlds in different settings in these games at release, or maybe that they add like a completely new setting or world after launch. And yes, it's of course not the first time that we see that in an AC game, but Reno is of course talking about new technologies, so he means way more substantial worlds, so basically two big open worlds in different settings in one game. There are more interesting things from this interview that I want to discuss, for example that Ubisoft is working on how to accelerate the development pipelines, so how to create content faster so they have more content in the game. Something they're already like doing in the Canadian studios. And I mean, like, if they can keep the same quality as for example Origins or what we saw in Far Cry 5, then I'm all for it. Reno also talks about AI and how there are still a lot of things that can happen to make the characters feel more alive. As an example, he talks about Far Cry 5 where the AI would react to things you did in another region. So you had the idea that the world was more impacted by what you did and that the AI recognized that. And I saw small things like that and I thought they were pretty cool. Another big thing from the interview is that Ubisoft will not want to give finite experiences anymore, that a game can be finished. Funny that they just did that with Far Cry 5, as I noted in my recent Your Game show. That's like my weekly talk show here on JorRaptor. Every Sunday it's live. The recent episodes went in depth on this Far Cry 5 issue, and that's that there is nothing left to do once you liberated all the regions. So there are almost no enemies left to kill. Well, this is something that Ubisoft wants to move away from. That, according to Reno, you can be the hero many times, not just once. And it's interesting that they just released Far Cry 5 where this was still the case. And we already see this shift in Odyssey, where the big conquest, 150 versus 150 battles, can be done over and over again. And we also have these mercenaries that will come and hunt you. They will be there all the time. You can keep hunting them, keep getting their loot. And now, according to this article, this is something that Ubisoft wants to do in all their games moving forward. And I think that that's only a good thing. Because right now, the question is, why won't you let people that want to enjoy your game for longer not enjoy your game by making the open world empty? And we saw that in Origins as well. You killed the awesome roaming Filaki bosses or the elephants, and well, you can't kill them anymore. Now it seems like with Odyssey that will not be the case. Then when talking about the community, the Far Cry Arcade is getting touched on, of course, where players can create their own levels and share it with the world, and how they might want to open it to more games. I mean, imagine being able to build your own outpost in an Assassin's Creed game, for example. I think that could be pretty cool, or a sort of boss rush mode where you can continue to the next area after you killed one difficult enemy from the game. I mean, there are a ton of possibilities, of course, and it will keep the game like going because of new content. But right now, in the current state of the arcade, it's just that most of the content from the arcade is just not as fun to play. It's not as good, so why would you want to waste your time on it? Reno also touched on romance, and that there's an audience that is waiting for that, and that they have games that are ready to offer it, so they can make characters become more interesting and lovable because they don't only speak about fights. And I mean, Odyssey will be a great test bed for that. I like the promise and what I've seen so far, but because there are many romance options in the game and we can like really romance a ton of people, I think we kind of have to wait and see how it all pans out for the game, but I totally like the direction they're going in. And I think that about covers everything from that article, at least what I think you would care about. I put a link in the description down below so you can read it for yourself if you want. And again, what do you think of the idea of maybe having a next-gen Far Cry or Assassin's Creed with multiple settings in one game? I totally like that idea. Of course, subscribe for everything Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Far Cry 5. Drop a like to support the channel. Check out my recent video on Ubisoft teasing Season Pass content for Odyssey. And I will speak to you next time. Thanks a lot for watching and goodbye.